Good afternoon. Yesterday, December the 13th, at around 8:30 p.m. Baghdad time, United States military forces captured Saddam Hussein alive. He was found near a farmhouse outside the city of Tikrit in a swift raid conducted without casualties. And now the former dictator of Iraq will face the justice he denied to millions. The capture of this man was crucial to the rise of a free Iraq. It marks the end of the road for him and for all who bullied and killed in his name. For the Ba'athist holdouts largely responsible for the current violence, there will be no return to the corrupt power and privilege they once held. For the vast majority of Iraqi citizens who wish to live as free men and women, this event brings further assurance that the torture chambers and the secret police are gone forever. And this afternoon, I have a message for the Iraqi people. You will not have to fear the rule of Saddam Hussein ever again.
A dictator's face can live longer than the dictator. Long after the speeches stop, long after the statues crack, long after the fear changes shape, there it is quietly printed, returned in change, handled without ceremony. And in Iraq, after 2003, there was a moment when the United States publicly acknowledged that this matters, that to carry a dictator's portrait in your pocket is not neutral, it is psychological.
Armoured vehicles full of new banknotes for what the coalition calls a new era in Iraq. The Iraqi dinar notes were being delivered to banks under the watchful eye of both US and Iraqi security forces. They'll be going into circulation in 2 days' time, after months of coalition attempts to get Iraq's banking system back into operation. Iraqis have 3 months to exchange the old money for the new, but people were already queuing up at their local banks to avoid the rush. The notes no longer bear the image of Saddam Hussein, but a waterfall, a portrait of a Babylonian king, and a number of historic monuments. They also have security features to make it hard to counterfeit. But more than anything, the new notes are about a rupture with the past and about erasing all traces of Saddam from the national imagination.
The old Iraq dinar currency, many of them printed with Saddam Hussein's portrait, were gradually taken out of circulation. A massive currency exchange was organized under the legal authority of the occupation government. But the part that lingers is not just the logistics, it is the principle behind it. The idea that removing a single face can help an entire nation breathe differently. And once that principle is spoken out loud, once it is openly admitted, a new question becomes impossible to avoid. If America could do that for Iraq, why can't it do something as simple as reconsider who gets honored on its own money? In July of 1979, Saddam Hussein had worn the title of president for less than a week, but power does not wait for introductions. In a single afternoon, he unveiled the blueprint of his regime, not through laws, not through speeches, but through fear, carefully staged and performed in full view of the world. Party leaders were summoned to a grand hall, believing they were attending a routine meeting. Instead, they walked into a trap. They were met with accusations of betrayal, and one by one, names were called aloud, turning a room of loyal men into a theater of terror.
We're in Iraq in 1979. The newly appointed president has called his fellow party members to a meeting in a local theatre hall in Baghdad. His name is Saddam Hussein. He's only been president for a little under a week, but Iraq is his, and he wants everyone to know. It's July, and the temperature outside is pushing 40 degrees Celsius. The hall is hot, blisteringly hot. As Saddam takes the stage, he takes his time, shuffles a few papers, looks at his notes. Shortly before their newly appointed president arrived, one of his men appeared on stage. A terrible plot against the president and against Iraq has been uncovered, he informed the crowd. A group of high-ranking party members has conspired to remove Saddam Hussein from power. And then he revealed, all the guilty parties are in this room, right now. And now, the crowd sits frozen in silence. The president is in total control. Then, Saddam calls a man to the stage, and a tall, slender, middle-aged man starts walking down the aisle. His name is Muhi Adbek Hussein. He's part of the Revolutionary Command Council. He's a powerful man, but just a short while ago, he had opposed Saddam in a meeting. It was a mistake. He walks up onto the stage and stands behind a microphone. And then, slowly, he begins confessing. Confessing to crimes of wanting to overthrow Saddam Hussein. In the meantime, Saddam takes a seat by a long table full of microphones and lights a thick Cuban cigar. I was the one behind the plot against the new president, the man says. It was me who tried getting others to join in. But it's a lie. Nothing of what he admits on stage is true. What's really happened is that he's been thoroughly tortured and told that if he doesn't go up on that stage and say that he planned the plot against Saddam, the torturers will rape his wife and daughter right in front of him. He has no choice but to obey. And so he does. To save his family, Muhi lies about his own and his fellow party members' involvement in the plot to overthrow Saddam's new regime. Once he's finished, Saddam takes the floor. Again, Saddam is in no rush. He lights his cigar and then he asks out into the room. What means should be used against these traitors? You know the answer, he says after a pause. There is no other way than the sword. The terrified party members in the theatre hall begin to clap desperately. What else could they do? Saddam then gives an instruction to those assembled in the hall. When I have read out your name, you shall stand up, recite the party's slogan, and leave the room. And so he begins reading out names. One by one, they must rise from their seats, say the slogan, and then they are led out of the room. They haven't been told where they're going or what's waiting for them on the other side of the door, but they probably have an idea. Most of the people, though reluctantly, do as they're told. One man, however, is clearly confused at his name being called. Me? I haven't done anything, he shouts as he stands up. Saddam doesn't even bother to look at him. He just coolly repeats, "When I have read out your name, you shall stand up, recite the party's slogan, and leave the room." And then, nothing. The man just lowers his head and shuffles out of the room. Saddam continues until he has called out 68 names. He smiles and thanks those remaining in the hall for their loyalty, and then everyone stands up and once again begins a desperate standing ovation. Relief. Some even begin to cry. Up on the stage, even Saddam himself sheds a tear. Outside the hall, all the people whose names Saddam has called out are gathered in trucks and driven to prison. In the following days, 68 trials are held. 22 men, including 5 members of the Revolutionary Command Council, are sentenced to death. Saddam has appointed a number of executioners to complete the task of carrying out the executions. They're all members of the Ba'ath Party, his party, and none of them are executioners. They are then gathered in the building where the plotters allegedly should have laid their plans to overthrow Saddam's new regime. And then the condemned are dragged out into the adjoining yard where they are forced to their knees and blindfolded. Each of the executioners is then handed a weapon and assigned a victim. And while they prepare to murder their former party comrades, they can hear the sound of a large crowd gathering outside the building. Saddam wants to make sure that everyone knows what will happen to people who disobey, but most importantly, he wants to show his accomplices, willing or not. So Saddam has made sure that there's a demonstration at the same time as the executions, and it's a big one. Thousands of Iraqis gather with signs and flags, shouting praises to their new president and condemning the prisoners. And then, one by one, Saddam's former friends and fellow party members are shot. Some executioners are so nervous and scared that they miss and need to shoot their victims several times. It's gruesome, but Saddam is very satisfied. An excellent start to his presidential career, he thinks to himself. And so the first official order of the newly appointed president of Iraq has been carried out. What could be the next?
A political purge was staged as an inaugural ceremony, and a film of it was circulated as a warning. Saddam Hussein's rule was dependent on secret police repression and an extensive personality cult. It was an intentional effort to flood public life with his authority and his image. Dictatorships do not only punish, They imprint. They teach a population what not to do, what not to say, and what not to imagine. And once the state becomes one man, it begins to feel natural for that man to appear everywhere, on walls and schools and public squares, and eventually on the currency itself. Because money is more than spending power. Money is a daily reminder of who is allowed to represent a nation, and that is how Saddam's face came to live in the palms of Iraqi hands, one transaction at a time. But when the face finally disappears, what does that actually mean? When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, the end of Saddam Hussein's power was told through images, the fall of Baghdad, the toppling of statues, broadcasted to the world to show that a long and brutal era had finally closed, and yet the man at the center of it all was still out there, alive, hidden, hunted. For months, Saddam remained a shadow moving through his own former kingdom until December 13, 2003, when US forces finally pulled him from a small underground hiding place near Tikrit. The capture felt decisive, but it raised a deeper question. Who exactly had the right to judge a fallen dictator? And who had the power to hold him while that judgment was decided? On June 30th, 2004, legal custody of Saddam Hussein was formally transferred to Iraq's interim government, but physical custody never changed hands. He remained inside an American-controlled cell, guarded by American soldiers.
All Iraqis who take the side of freedom have taken the winning side. The goals of our coalition are the same as your goals: sovereignty for your country, dignity for your great culture, and for every Iraqi citizen, the opportunity for a better life. In the history of Iraq, a dark and painful era is over. A hopeful day has arrived. All Iraqis can now come together and reject violence and build a new Iraq.
That detail matters because it reveals something essential about that moment in history. Iraq was being rebuilt on paper as a sovereign nation, but on the ground the United States still controlled the walls, the weapons, and the keys. Power had shifted, but not completely, and the story of what to do with Saddam Hussein was only just beginning. The trial that followed was carried out through Iraqi courts, built in the fragile years after the invasion, shaped first by occupation and later revised under Iraqi law. And on December 30th, 2006, Saddam Hussein was executed under an Iraqi sentence. To the new government, it was meant to feel like closure, but closure is never just a legal word. It is not created only in courtrooms or verdicts. Sometimes closure begins in smaller, quieter places, in the ordinary objects people hold in their hands each day. And in Iraq, one powerful reminder still remained: banknotes that carried the face of the man the country was trying to forget.
Just in a minute. All the writers can come forward in a minute. I'm just giving people who want people. Show it to you in a minute. I promise.
I'm too optimistic concerning the exchange of the currency, and I think it will not going to be too long. I think it will take not more 2 weeks or 1 month to exchange the most of our currency in circulation. I think the last 2 months we still would have only a few of these banknotes.
In 2003 and 2004, Iraq underwent a currency transformation that was both economic and symbolic. A new series of Iraqi banknotes was introduced under a formal CPA order that defined the conversion period and placed the central bank's issuance under CPA supervision. This was not a small change. Rand's History of the Coalition Provisional Authority describes a nationwide currency exchange requiring enormous logistical coordination, new notes delivered across the country, information campaigns, and stabilization measures to rebuild confidence. Reporting framed the end of Saddam portrait cash as the end of a discredited era. Old notes became obsolete, and tons of them were destroyed. But perhaps the most important sentence, the most revealing detail of all, appears in an account from the Rand Corporation. An official reflecting on the currency exchange said simply, "Getting rid of old Saddam dinars had a huge psychological effect. That is the key. Not just that the new notes were safer from counterfeiting, not just that Iraq needed a single unified currency, but that a face printed on paper could carry real weight, that a portrait could oppress, and that removing it could feel like relief." Now hold that thought gently, carefully, like a small flame, because it illuminates the contradiction at the heart of this story. If the United States understood this principle well enough to help carry it out in Iraq, what does it mean that the same principle still struggles to exist at home? American money also has faces. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta lists them plainly: Washington on the $1, Jefferson on the $2, and Jackson on the $20. In many classrooms, these faces are introduced as symbols of wisdom, courage, and statecraft, but history is also personal, and for Black Americans, these faces are not distant icons. They are connected to human ownership.
I was wondering about our yesterdays and digging through the rubble. And to say the least, somebody went to a hell of a lot of trouble to make sure that when we looked things up, we wouldn't fare too well, and we would come up with totally unreliable pictures of ourselves. But I've compiled what few facts I could, such as they are, to see if we could find out a little bit of something, and this is what I got so far. First, white folks discovered Africa. They claimed it fair and square. Cecil Rhodes couldn't have been robbing nobody because, hell, there wasn't nobody there. And white folks brought all the civilization because there wasn't none around. How could the folks be civilized when wasn't nobody writing nothing down? And just to prove all of their suspicions, well, didn't take too long. They found out that there were whole tribes of people in plain sight running around with no clothes on. That's right. The men, the women, the young, and the old righteous folks covered their eyes. And no time was spent considering the environment. Hell no, this just wasn't civilized. And another piece of information they had, or at least this is what we were taught, is that unlike the civilized people of Europe, these tribal units actually fought. And yes, there was some crude implements, and yes, there was primitive art, and yes, they were masters of hunting and fishing, and courtesy came from the heart. And yes, there was love and medicine, religion, intertribal communication by drum, but no paper, no pencils, and no other utensils, and hell, these folks never even heard of a gun. And this is why the colonies came, to stabilize the land, because the dark continent had copper and gold, and the discoverers had themselves a plan. They would discover all the places with promise. You didn't need no titles and deeds. Then they would appoint people to make everything legal, to sanction the trickery and greed. And back in the jungle, when the natives got restless, they would call it guerrilla attack. And they would never describe that the folks finally got wise and decided that they would fight back. And still, we are victims of word games. Semantics is always a bitch. Places once referred to as underdeveloped are now called mineral rich. And the game goes on eternally. Unity kept just beyond reach. Egypt and Libya used to be in Africa. They've now been moved to the Middle East. There are examples galore, I assure you. But if interpreting were left up to me, I'd be sure every time folks knew this version wasn't mine, which is why it is called his story.
So here's the pivot, gentle but unavoidable. In Iraq, a dictator's portrait on money was treated as a psychological residue of oppression that needed to be removed. In America, enslavers' portraits on money are treated as heritage, as tradition, as something above politics. The question is not whether these men existed or whether history should be remembered. The question is simpler and harder. Why is the honor permanent but the harm negotiable? To understand what that does to a people, to see why this isn't just a debate about design, there has to be a quiet journey into the American experience itself, into the long wake of slavery. The story of slavery is sometimes spoken of like a distant storm, a dark chapter, a long time ago, but it was not a storm, it was an ocean crossed in chains, an ocean that swallowed names and languages. Historians tell us that millions were forced onto ships, that millions survived the crossing, but even those words millions survived feel too small for what they carried. By 1860, nearly 4 million people were enslaved within the borders of the United States, not hidden, not secret, but woven into the fabric of the economy. Slavery was not just cruelty, it was infrastructure, it was balance sheets and ledgers, it was mortgages and markets, and beneath it all, something quieter and more devastating: families undone, children sold away from mothers, husbands separated from wives, promises dissolved at auction blocks, love treated as disposable, bonded hearts broken for profit. So when we speak of slavery, we are not speaking only of labor, we are speaking of a system that measured human life in currency, and that memory does not disappear simply because the chains are gone.
Some like that and some like coke. Nikki likes it in the back. That day go.
This is Walter Beltrop. Sometimes on a Saturday night, if they can get a babysitter, Walter and I take our wives bowling. As you can imagine, Walter's a powerful bowler. He practically throws the ball down to the pin. Walter's wife, Wanzer, used to be a secretary. But Walter is a top-notch social worker. He works in a community center with young people. Tony's the oldest child. She already attends nursery school. She's 3 years old and has a great personality. This is Saturday morning. It's the morning that Walter always tries to help out around the house. Many American men like to do a little work around the house. Even I like to wash the dishes now and then. On this morning, Walter's going to help with the breakfast. His specialty is pancakes. Wanzer thinks that Walter's pancakes are a little too crisp, but she tries to humor him. But Tony finds them very tasty. I'd like you to meet another family here in Brooklyn, the Smiths. Marvin Sr. is a parole officer. This is a very festive day, a very special day. Their two sons, aged 9 and 7, are excited as they await the arrival of the grandparents. Today is Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving dinner is one of the great American customs. It is a day when families get together. On this day, it just wouldn't be right without a turkey. It's been a long day for Mrs. Smith, who was expecting a third child. Father says grace. This is the important thing about Thanksgiving: to give thanks for the blessings of the year.
To me, Thanksgiving is a day where you're home. It's a home day. So you have a lovely home and then take somebody out to dinner on Thanksgiving Day. No, there's something missing.
In another part of town, at an old folks center, people of another generation are celebrating Thanksgiving too. This is Harlem. Harlem has always had the reputation of being a place of music, gaiety, and excitement. But to us, it has another meaning. Here, only Negroes live. How did this come about? The Negro was brought from Africa to be sold into slavery. A century ago, slavery was abolished, but a pattern of segregation took its place. Although there have been significant changes, we are still deprived in many instances of full rights and opportunities. For example, there are hospitals in which the surgeons we saw earlier are not allowed to practice. And in some states, we are still restricted by signs like these. Later in this film, we shall see some of the ways in which the situation is changing. But first, let us ask a cross-section of Negroes how segregation affects their lives.
Segregation to the average Negro means being held back. He's looking for progress. He wants to move forward in the American mainstream. Segregation holds him back.
I think it's something that's ridiculous. You take the white people in the South that, or not only in the South, anywhere, that refuses to allow a Negro man or a Negro woman to sit in a restaurant or to ride next to them in a bus or a train or anything, and then on the other hand turns around and wants a colored woman to come into their home and cook their food and serve them their dinner after having our hands all in their food. I think somebody's got to be crazy there.
Up to this present time, it hasn't affected me at all. As far as my work and my social activities, up until this present time, I can say it hasn't affected me.
After slavery, there were years that historians now call Reconstruction, but in many towns it felt less like rebuilding and more like warning. Terror was used to remind Black Americans of their place. Violence became a message. Thousands of lives were taken in spectacles meant not just to harm, but to instruct. And when the spectacle faded, policy took its place. Lines were drawn across neighborhoods. Credit was withheld. Opportunity was rationed. Entire communities were quietly marked as unworthy of investment. The consequences did not announce themselves with sirens. They unfolded slowly, year after year. And even now, the numbers still whisper the imbalance. Disparities that persist inside institutions that describe themselves as neutral. This is not a simple chain of cause and effect. History rarely is, but it accumulates, layer upon layer. And that is why symbols are never just symbols. When a people have lived through centuries of exclusion mapped, measured, enforced, it matters which faces are elevated as national heroes. Because those faces are not abstract. They are reminders, handled daily, passed from hand to hand.
I like them greenbacks. I like them greenbacks. You know what I'm saying? It's the kind of money people spend. People is very particular about that. I saw that. That was one of the main stories from the war. Was the first big thing we did was they said, now that Iraq has been liberated, we have managed to take Saddam Hussein's face off of the money. And I'm not gonna lie, when that press conference came off, I was like choked up. I was actually proud to be an American because that is a very subtle psychological nuance of oppression to have a dictator on your money. And it's thoughtful to be able to take that motherfucker off for the goodwill of another person, right? But then I thought, well, if you could do that for Iraq, what about our money, man? Our money looked like baseball cards with slave owners on. George Washington is the worst of the worst. Yes, I said it. You mythologize this motherfucker like he was the greatest dude, man. If I went back in time with a white person and we saw George Washington walking in front of our time machine, my white friend would probably be like, oh my God, Dave, look, there's George Washington. It's the father of this great nation. I'm gonna go shake his hand. I'd be on the other side like, run, nigga, George Washington. And we'd both be right. You like him because he wrote the Declaration of Independence and all that shit. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. Go get me a sandwich, nigger, or I'll kill you. Liberty, justice for all. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? Wait a minute, did he not own slaves? Didn't he own slaves? That's all I'm saying.
A 2025 paper examining the racialized impacts of Confederate symbols suggests that placement, especially around courts and civic institutions, can shape Black Southerners' perceptions of fairness and justice itself. Now compare that with Iraq. Saddam's portrait from currency produced a huge psychological effect. In Iraq, the oppressor's face was treated as something people should not be forced to touch every day. In the United States, enslavers' faces are treated as something people should accept quietly, as the cost of being American. Changing currency won't solve everything, but it can ask a more honest question. Why is symbolic relief offered to others as a principle, while being withheld at home as a controversy? When Iraq removed Saddam's portrait from its currency, it was framed as part of rebuilding credibility, part of restoring trust in a public life that had been saturated with a dictator's image. When Americans remove Confederate monuments or even debate removing them, the argument often shifts from dignity to panic. Talk of erasing history, even when historians and institutions note that many of these monuments were erected during Jim Crow as political projects, not neutral grief. A 2025 report describes more than 300 Confederate monuments removed since 2020, thousands still remaining, and ongoing backlash politics that aims to restore symbolic dominance. Who we choose to honor and memorialize says a lot about who we are. So what does it say, what does it quietly confess when the United States can acknowledge the psychological oppression of a dictator on Iraqi money, but refuses to reckon with enslavers on its own? It suggests that the fight is not about history, it is about belonging, about the right to be represented by the nation's symbols instead of haunted by them. And perhaps the most haunting part is this: the United States already demonstrated that it understands the power of symbols. It already helped remove a face because it recognized what that face did to the daily mind. So the final question does not ask what America can do, it asks what America is willing to do when the dignity at stake belongs to Black Americans. Because if dignity mattered enough to remove a dictator from Iraqi money, why doesn't Black American dignity matter enough to do the same at home?